Hey, Cheryl.
It's been a while. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
extremely.
Mute. Okay. Thank you.
So, welcome everyone. So great to be able to learn with you. Today we are on Siman Shin Dalet, which Rav Nachum has asked us to teach. So we're ostensibly covering the issue of uh, Eved versus a Safir and the work that they can do on Shabbos. However, this entire Siman presupposes the knowledge of a large body of knowledge around the Goy Shel Shabbat in general, related to the concept of amirah lenofri. So there's a whole bunch of simanim that are kind of tied in here. 242 to 76, and I'm looking forward to 307, which is going to give us a much wider view onto this entire topic. Um, And so Rav Nachum has asked us to give a general grounding and schematic. What are the big concepts here? We're not going to be able to cover the entire subject of Goy Shabbat, the Shabbos Goy in one class, but we at least want to give a handle on the essential terms so that when we're moving forward, it is much easier for all of us to have conversations moving on. The other thing I'll say is that thematically, this is just a very rich and practical topic. My own professional life involves working with non-Jews. So I'll just give one anecdote, which is that we're trying to schedule our annual kickoff event. And the days that most of the non-Jewish pastors and organizers were around was Saturday. And I said, I can't have an event on Saturday. Can we do it on Sunday? They said, we'd rather not, but I guess we can make the time. But if we did, we would have to work on Saturday in order to get ready for our event. Uh, so this is all very live for me. But I think what it hints at is that Jews and non-Jews are enmeshed in a society together, and Shabbos is fundamentally about Havdalah, about separation. And so the question that's going to keep coming up again is, what is the role of non-Jews in our Shabbos practice? To what extent are they part of it as opposed to removed from it? So there's a sociological and theological element as well that we will be exploring. Aaron, I'll turn it over to you for a couple of words so we get started.
Great. Thanks, Alan. So just to lay out the structure for today, we're gonna go briefly through Siman 304, really just the last seif for the most part, but Alan will take us through, which will get at the question, which will be sort of a meta introduction to the counterintuitive idea that there might be such a thing as having a Jew do work for you on Shabbos, and under what conditions that person may or may not exist. Then we'll go to the Rambam, where we'll just try to lay out the key concepts, questions, ideas, rationales. Then we will jump into, well, as part of looking at the Rambam, we'll also look at the Shulchan Aruch and just try to map where different parts of the Shulchan Aruch line up with some of the questions the Rambam raises. We'll say that the Rambam in this case is better organized than the Shulchan Aruch. Goy Shel Shabbos for the Shulchan Aruch shows up in like 8 different places, not necessarily in the most intuitive format, and the Rambam has it all in one parak in what is arguably a slightly more intuitive format. Then we'll look at 307, part of 307. Again, we won't be going all the way in depth. 307 is Amir Lenochri, among other sorts of Amirot. And we won't even be looking at all the parts of amirah l'nochri that show up in 307, just the main chunk. And then we'll look at, this is actually something more ambitious than it sounded when we were discussing it. Then we'll look at 244 briefly, which is schirut, which is maybe a subsection of amirah. And then we will turn to some general theological questions that Alan has hinted at. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Alan for 304. Joel,
Yes,
please.
perfect.
I just want to, sorry, and you can tell me if I'm offline based doing this, but I'm going to challenge you a little bit. I'm going to say, I want to maybe all of us to think about why is the Tur Shulchan Aruch formulation organized this way and not as you claim, I think somewhat falsely, but that's okay, that, not as well as the Rambam where he just puts, the interaction with Goyim in one section and it's all over the place in the Tur Shulchan Aruch. Like, what's the project and why, Daled Shin is it's going to be in most of our books instead of, right? Like why this is even the place where we're starting from it. So I you may say we shouldn't answer this now, but I just want to throw that out there as a question.
Yes, it is. We'll leave the question hanging. Just to put one piece of pushback, I will just say, even in trying to map the Shulchan Aruch onto the Rambam, I'd say preparing this material, it was much easier to begin with the Rambam and then move to the Shulchan Aruch. There is not necessarily a way, I think intuitively, that you would know based on the title of the Simanim in the index where all the relevant halachot, you might figure out most of them, but I don't think you'd actually get all of them from the index for the Shulchan Aruch. That's not to say that the Shulchan Aruch doesn't have its own logic, so not to insult the Mechaber. Jessica says, in the Torah, interactions with non-Jews permeate other aspects of life more. It's not one discrete inyan. Yeah, arguably. I'd say for the Rambam, there's also like a lot of different inyanim. He just decided to put it all in one place, which at the very least makes it easier to read. But maybe with that, we'll jump to 304 and we can return to this question both today and also when we get to 307 mamash in a few weeks.
Okay. So starting out with 304, the place I just very quickly want to go is the pasuk. There are several psukim that all this comes from, but a lot of the lack of clarity in 304 comes around the question of Avdut, who is able or not able to do work on Shabbos. So just putting up the basic pasuk in Shemot here. And I want to just very quickly ask you all, if we took away all pre-knowledge of Hilchot Shabbos, who would you say is actually able to work on Shabbat, and who is not? Anyone want to just read? I mean, y'all can read the pasuk. So, lo tasa kolmacha ata umincha v'tacha avdecha v'maschan v'mtacha v'gercha asher b'sharecha. So, just reading this pasuk, totally cold. Who are the people who are allowed to or not allowed to do work?
I would say anyone associated with the Jewish household is not allowed to melachot on Shabbat. Everyone that's external, just based on the pasuk, everyone that's external to a Jewish household technically should be able to do melachot.
Anyone who's external to a Jewish household should be able to do melachot. Anyone have a different answer? Yeah, Jacob.
I would think. I mean, I'm not certain how Avdecha and Matcha are always used, but my instinct would be that it could just be talking about the Jewish servants to the exclusion of non-Jews. So non-Jews would be allowed, non-Jewish servants might be, or slaves might be allowed to do work.
So the reason why I read it that way is because Avdecha v'Amatecha is like a personal aspect of Avdecha, your slave, your slave. it's a your title type of thing. So it has to be associated somehow with the Jewish household.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm gonna just Max, I see your head. I'm just gonna keep going quickly. I think there are kind of three levels at which one could read this. One is that just to be the most extreme, no one who is in your reshut should be doing work, and Ibn Ezra actually mentions this. Like the sense could be, okay, the entire society around you in your Jewish community, work stam should not be taking place. Not you, not the ger who happens to be walking through. It is a moment of shutdown. The second possibility is the non-Jew can be doing work, just not for you. Like lo tasa kol malacha avzachem tacha v'mancha v'mtacha bishbilcha, right? But they can go off and do their own thing in their own homes, which is something you'll see in our city. The third possibility is, oh, actually, the ger and the people around you are able to do some form of work for you, and that ger is not specifically in the category of Ovid. But the point I want to make here is, it is not immediately self-evident that non-Jews should be permitted to do some forms of work for Jews on Shabbat, and in some ways that actually runs against the general sense that Shabbos should be a time of total societal shutdown. So with that in mind, let's turn towards Shindalit. So just looking outside, we're not going to go through most of it in, but did folks see a distinction in the din between an Eved and a Safir? Can anyone say what is the thing that a Safir is might be allowed to do that an Eved is not? If folks want, we can also quickly look inside.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I missed it.
What is the distinction that the Shulchan Aruch makes? And it's in Sif Gimel between an Eved and a Safir. Sorry, go ahead.
So the Eved, like what the Eved does sort of is chal onto his master, but that's not true of the Sachir, right? So the Sachir, you don't have a mitzvah with respect to the Sachir.
Exactly. And there is some discussion, Ruben, go ahead.
What's interesting, I think it's the language of mitzaver shvitato. You kind of chayav that he rests, right? So like kind of forcing you to enact the act of resting, which I think is an interesting distinction.
Right. The language that comes up is lim noah, right? Like you actually have to step in and forcibly prevent, and an Eved who is in your responsibility from doing work. So going off of Sarah's point, like what are some possible rationales for allowing a Safir to do work when they're employed by you, while an Eved cannot? what is the reason for this distinction, and why we should allow a Sacher to do it. Jacob, go ahead.
Well, there's a level that if he's being specifically paid, there's a level of him doing the work for himself and not just the work for you. That's one rationale.
Beautiful. Yeah. Did you see the language in the Shulchan Aruch for this? How did the sources describe this idea that a non-Jew is doing work for themselves but not for you? So it's adapted to nafshe ka'avid, right? Like ultimately, a non-Jew going off and doing work for themselves. If they're in your employment, they're not actually really kavush. They're not under your domain or in your ship. There's an interesting side note. I'm not going to get really too into the halacha of abzut. There's in the Beit Yosef and the Mishnah Berurah, an interesting question comes up. Apparently, in Muslim lands, there was a loophole through which an eved to a Jew could get out of servitude by converting to Islam. And therefore, the Beis Yosef and others consider that as long as it is possible to get out of servitude, then you're not actually considered as fully being under the Jewish domain, and therefore the Jewish master is not responsible for the work. So that there's the sense is that this non-Jew has agency of their own, and is therefore the Jew is not responsible for their own well-being. So the question I just wanted to finish by posing is, do people buy this argument, right? Like, if you are employing a non-Jew, they're working in your house as the babysitter, as the cook. Is it really true that any work that they're doing on Shabbat is of their own volition? Aaron, you wanted to jump in there? Man, must have a slight hand there.
Yeah, it's light hand.
Good to see you also.
It feels like one of the things that's happening in the Chumash language with Avdecha v'Yamatcha ve'Gercha Asher b'Sharecha is that this is a real member of your household in the same way that your women and your children are. And that's kind of reflective of how an Eved works. And it's also reflective of how your sort of hired servant who lives in your house works, even if they are less sort of subject to you than like Eved proper would be. They're like a real household member, and therefore they're meaningfully always entangled in your life.
Right. But so if someone is like your is a live-in or a right, a nanny, do you feel like they would still fall under the category of Eved or Sachir?
I mean, I think that they're a Sachir technically, but I think that their conditions of their labor are more like some of the Avadim than they are of some of the Sachir. Like, they're not living in a separate place and coming in and out of your house in the way that I think we picture a basic Sachir being. They're much more householdy in a way that I'm imagining my Tanakh Eved. And so they're an interesting test case for how I'm constructing my category.
I think that's beautiful. And Ori, go ahead.
I mean, you could also make a chiluk on just if board is part of their compensation, right? I feel like that's a very impactful chiluk, right? Because if they're living in your home, then the idea of avdecha or even gercha from the initial pasuk, the way you said it sounded like there's some close possession, and even if it's not possession, it's like the one that's completely associated with you. And I think your home, like all the Hilchot Shabbat, you're responsible for what goes on in your home, so that would seemingly be an extension of that principle.
Just to also, I think, point out, Alan, as you said at the beginning, the move from like the sort of public domain to the home is itself like something that changes from the course of the Tanakh to the Shulchan Aruch, namely over the course of Galus, right? In the Tanakh, when it says Amatcha avdecha v'amatcha v'gercha asher b'sharecha, doesn't make a chiluk who's what sort of ama or eved, what sort of ger. And already in the Shulchan Aruch, one of the reasons, not already in the Shulchan, by the time of the Shulchan Aruch, one of the reasons we're talking about different kind of avadim, right? If there's an eved who's not a Jew, in which case maybe you're not mitzvah al shvitato, it's because they're like a ger toshav. Well, a ger toshav, I thought I'm mitzvah al shvitato according to the Tanakh. Well, that's also because there's a chiluk between a ger tzedek, meaning a Jew, and a ger toshav, which already seems to undercut the thrust of if what we're talking about is a ger tzedek, basically almost a Jew or is a Jew, and of course I'm mitzvah al shvitato, as opposed to a ger toshav, which seems to be the context of the Tanakh. So just that, yeah, Lexi, go ahead.
There's also, I mean, the shift between how we're understanding avadim, right? That like this doesn't seem to necessarily be pshat in Tanakh, but like in rabbinic literature, we get this notion that most of your avadim are like being circumcised and are accepting upon themselves most of the mitzvot, and are basically like have most of the same mitzvot that women do, which is not something that Tanakh seems to be referring to, right? Tanakh seems to be referring to this notion that like they are non-Jewish avadim, they're just like under your control. Whereas by the time we get to rabbinic literature, there's this theory that actually the people in your household are all some level of obligated in mitzvot. And then once we move beyond that, we get into a world where like realistically, most people are actually not doing that. So we have these different in-between categories of what an eved is and whether there's someone who is themselves obligated in mitzvot.
Yeah, so Rav Nachum, the podcast is not to get into this question too much, but it's like the Ramban and Yevamot and the Rashal spell this out very clearly and well. I think I included them on the additional sources on the source sheet. But the point I'll just close here with is that even though we're saying that Eved is not a like practical category Bisman Hazeh, there is a case to be made, as Min was pointing out, that employment in this day and age is not necessarily a situation of like totally free agency. So the Rabban brings up a case of saying to your Eved, you can go off and just do your own thing on the weekend. I'm not claiming any sort of responsibility for you, and whatever work you do, that's on you. But there's still a sense of coercion or pressure that can enter into the work relationship, even when you're not on quote the boss's time. Right? People enter into employment sometimes out of a sense that they need the money, and so like to say that there's you're doing it all for yourself is a little bit a complicated question. Okay, I will turn it over to Aron because this Siman brings up sort of derech agav, the question of, well, what work may one actually tell a non-Jew to do? And that brings us into a huge can of worms, which we're going to need to start to unpack.
Great. Thank you. And just apropos of what Alan said, I put a passage in the chat, and if it's not from a rabbi, then it is surely from the descendant of rabbis. But But okay, we'll turn to the Rambam. We're not going to read the Rambam inside because it's quite long, but the Rambam describes, I think, broadly a couple of categories, concerns, questions that come up with the question related to non-Jews doing work on Shabbos. And I think there are broadly two categories. What are the categories the Rambam discusses, if you had to summarize them? What are the things I might want to do related to non-Jews on Shabbos that the Rambam is addressing? Yeah, I won't spoil it further. Ruben.
I don't know if this is a category, but I'm thinking of using a non-Jew's labor power in order to make money, potentially on Shabbos, using a non-Jew to, for example, of like selling your clothes to the non-Jew in order to, at some point, potentially on Shabbos, have them sold in the marketplace. So that's one thing that comes to mind.
So and I think this maybe falls under a broader category, one of the concerns is getting non-Jews to do sort of an economic transaction for you or perform labor for you on Shabbos. Other broad questions, criteria, of Lexi.
We have a couple distinctions, right, related to what Ruben just said. Are we doing this because we want to benefit? What is the form of sort of like economic profit? Or when are people doing things just for us? Stam, like we hire them to do a thing versus asking people to do things for a tzorech that is deemed important, whether it be a mitzvah or, according to the Rambam, other things, including like being a little sick or some other like potential of hefsed, things like that. And also the difference between asking a non-Jew to do something versus benefiting from labor that they have done, and the various categories of those.
Great. And I think that really is the two main questions here. On the most broad level, there is getting a non-Jew to do something for you, and whether that's asking them or hiring them or being in a business relationship with them. And then a separate question of benefiting from something non-Jews do. Those two situations could be related. If I said to a non-Jew, do this thing, and I shouldn't have said it, now what happens to the thing? Can I benefit from it? Can Alan benefit from it? Can you benefit from it? But they could also be totally independent, right? A non-Jew shows up at my house and he's baked a lovely cake on Shabbat, and I eat the cake. And, he happened to also, not only did he bake it on Shabbat, he drove it in his car, and then, he also has lit the candles. So on the broadest level, and if you look at Shmirat Shabbat K'Hilchata, those are the two categories it lays out. We'll go through those one at a time, right? We have maybe the category we call amirah l'nochri, saying something to a nochri, and hana'a, receiving benefit from nochri. Hana'a meaning hana'a below amirah. Can you receive hana'a from something a nochri did that you had nothing to do with, or that the nochri did and you did have something to do with, but now it's b'di'evet. And in general, not in every scenario, but almost always, amirah is going to be lechatchila. Lechatchila, can I get this person to do something? And hana'a below amirah, is going to be b'di'evet. Now that the non-Jew has done something, can I benefit from it? So looking at amirah in the Rambam, what are some of the criteria that are important to him that determine whether you can do a sort of amirah? And maybe point us to, if you want to go be above and beyond, point us to a halacha. Next.
In halacha dalid, there's the question of whether part of it is whether the non-Jew is doing it for their own benefit, and then attached to that is, are there other people benefiting? How many of those people are Jews? How many of those people are not Jews?
Is that amirah?
Sorry, are you within amirah?
Oh, sorry, yes, within amirah.
Sorry.
No worries. Okay, within amirah, what are some of the criteria that determine whether this thing is allowed? And you don't have to lay out the decision tree for me. Just give me some of the categories. Jessica.
Whether it's Doraita or Shvut is
Great.
one.
Is it Doraita or Shvut? What else? Some other considerations for the Rambam.
If it's L'Shem Mitzvah or because, there's someone who's Chala or it's some kind of Shat Chak kind of thing.
Great. And so that's right. Amirah generally, that doesn't necessarily seem to have an economic relationship. What about in Schirut, which we could maybe bundle under Amirah? What are some of the questions that determine whether I can hire someone to do something for me? Sarah.
When you make the arrangement and like what are the kind of time constraints around the arrangement, let's say. So like,
Great.
did I tell them that I wanted to do it on this particular day? Did I say, here's a job for you? I'm going to hire you for the next month. Oh, and by the way, you happen to work on Shabbos.
Yeah, or maybe you can work when you want. Now, if I say to someone you have to work every day, that might be a problem. But if I say to them you work 6 days a week and you pick, potentially maybe not a problem. Ruben.
I think when it comes to hiring someone, discretion and whether the work is perceptible in the public domain is also an issue.
Great. There's a question of what will the Jews around you think that you hired this person to do work on Shabbat Davka? Right. And then somewhere in between, there's also the question of, Joel, go ahead.
No,
Joel.
I was gonna say, I think Shvitat Kalim comes into this too, right? And the question of whose Kalim are they using, and is there an issue with your Kalim doing work on Shabbat, either from other people seeing it or just because they are your Kalim, right? Which is all a little bit convoluted, both here and in the Gemara itself.
Great. When I color coded the Rambam of whether he's talking about Amirah or Hana'ah, I left Kalim as an indeterminate color. Right? It's can non-Jews use your means of production? And is the concern there that I'm somehow benefiting? Is it Marit Ayin that it looks like I'm benefiting or it looks like I'm instructing them to do something? Or yeah, right. Is the issue essentially Marit Ayin or is it something else? Does it fall neatly into one of these two categories? Just to highlight one other thing economically in between what Sarah and Ruben said, right? I could be in a situation. What's a situation where I'm not telling someone to work on Shabbos explicitly, but it might be still problematic based on the information I've given them? Or the situation I've put them in. Ruben.
I have no idea if this is what you're asking for. Is it when you contract someone to work over like a very long period of time, say building a house or on some sort of project like that?
Actually
No.
thinking of the opposite.
Oh, yeah.
Sarah.
A case where you say, okay, like I'm going to contract you to, I don't know, fix my car. And that takes X number of hours of labor, but I want it done by Sunday morning. It's like, there's only one way which that can happen.
Right. Or even if I say, please do it as soon as possible. It's so important to me, such that I'm maybe not forcing them to work on Shabbos or telling them to work on Shabbos, but I'm pretty sure that I'm leading them to a situation where they're going to work on Shabbos. Okay, so those are some of the considerations or criteria. We're not going to talk about how they all interact in this moment, but what are some of the rationales the Rambam gives? We already mentioned one. Ruben said, Davka, when we're talking about where the work is happening, but also maybe more broadly, there's a concern that other Jews will misunderstand what's happening. What the Rambam gives one other, as far as I can tell, rationale for amirah as being problematic. And so my question is, what is that rationale? And what is the rationale the Rambam does not give? Though I guess it's sort of implied. Ruben.
Well, in the first halacha, he gives his rationale for amirah l'nochri just in general, which is that so it doesn't sort of become devalued by Jews themselves. Whereas it shows Shabbat kala beinehem, and then they would just come to do the things themselves outright.
Great. So there's a slippery slope argument, which actually suggests that, on some fundamental level, there's not really anything wrong with amirah beyond that it's, shvut. What is a rationale the Rambam does not at least explicitly give? It's like a popular cultural rationale when people talk about this topic. Jacob.
Oh, I was just thinking he's not looking at the pasuk in certain ways about like not like having your servants do work.
Okay, he doesn't bring a pasuk here, but what else could he have said about why we don't do amirah l'nochri more broadly? With Joel, is that a hand?
Yeah, but I think Ruben had a hand first.
Ruben, go.
Thank you. In order to preserve the relationship between Jews and non-Jews, I would say.
That also an interesting one.
Oh,
I think he doesn't.
Okay.
Sorry, I shouldn't have been fishing. But I think he doesn't say, though. Maybe he sort of takes for granted based on what it would even be possible to ask non-Jews to do. He doesn't say like this would ruin Shabbos. If you have goyim doing all the things you can't do, all of a sudden like Shabbos isn't Shabbos. Joel.
I'm going to restate that in a different way. Tell me if you think it's the same thing. He doesn't worry about the Shabbos atmosphere.
Yeah,
maybe exactly. He is in some simanim, which is the thing. They're not simanim in the Rambam. Halachot in the Rambam, but he doesn't explicitly say, "I don't want a Shabbos where malacha is getting done," kind of thing.
Great.
Well, this is interesting, right? When Aron and I learned some of this material, we're talking about the tour and Reish Membet. He brings the pasuk that we spent some time on 2 classes back. Diber dabar. Right, that your dibor and Shabbos should not be like your dibor in a fold.
Alan, I think that's actually 307.
307. Oh, excuse me. You're correct. Right, which is somewhat odd because it doesn't quite neatly map onto everything else there, but there is this general sense, right? Yeah, Shabbos should just feel different. This kind of like moralistic drash is trying to convey.
Great, and that goes maybe Joel back to your point about how the Shulchan Aruch is organized. 307, which we'll get to in a few moments, organized around amirah, like is essentially all the things you can't say on Shabbat. Some of those are things you can't say to non-Jews, and some of those are things you can't say to Jews. We'll return to that in a second. Okay, so Orech, go ahead.
That one, just the way you're stating it, divides between what we were saying before, the timing considerations, saying it before Shabbat and saying it on Shabbat. If I say it on Shabbat, then you're in that, dibur category, but you could still kill the Shabbat atmosphere by giving the commands before Shabbat.
Right. Though again,
the conflict between those two different aspects.
Right. There are also many of these things you also can't do before Shabbat, depending on what the thing is. Lexi.
I think it's interesting getting at your question of why the Rambam doesn't mention this, because in the case of Muktzah, which we'll hopefully get to do more in depth, like it's sort of the opposite, where we saw this a little bit, and I think one of the intro classes, where there's different explanations of why we have Muktzah, and some of them are like, oh, it's so you won't carry, right? It's like, so you won't do X, Y, Z. Whereas the Rambam is more like, no, there's actually something inherently problematic, that we're worried that like if you can just carry around all of these things, like you're just going to be like bustling back and forth, and like especially if you're a person who doesn't do productive labor, your Shabbos won't really look like a Shabbos, right? So we do also have precedent of the Rambam himself essentially using this framework of like, it's not that we're worried about this because we're worried you're going to do a malacha primarily, it's that we're worried about this because it's not going to make Shabbos like Shabbos.
Great. And we see that even in the ambiguity of that phrase in the first halacha, where he says, "Kadei shelo tiyeh Shabbat kala be'eineihen ve'yavohu la'asot malacha ba'atzman." They seem like actually one consideration, right? So that they won't see Shabbos lightly and do malacha, but they could possibly be two separate considerations. So that they won't do Shabbos lightly, they won't see Shabbos lightly, there won't be a Shabbos atmosphere, and one of the consequences of that will be that they do malachot. I want to move on just to the question of hana'ah below amirah. What are some of the considerations that the Rambam lays out? If a non-Jew has done something, can you benefit from it? You had nothing to do with it. Can you benefit from it? What are some of the things that determine whether you might be able to benefit or not? Ruben.
Well, it's whether he did it for a Jew or whether he didn't do it for the Jew himself. Or like whether he did it for himself, whether he did it for the Jew, or like whether he did it in public or he didn't do it in public. So I think those are two relevant considerations.
Public, private, for themselves, not for themselves, some other considerations. Jacob?
Is it still Shabbat, or is it a period of time after Shabbat where the impact of where the work could not have been done independently after Shabbat?
Yeah, I would say that maybe, right, if we're talking about Kadesh Yasu is more of a consequence. If the non-Jew did it on Shabbat, how long do you have to wait until after Shabbat until you can use it? But for the question of can you do it on, can you use it on Shabbat, what are some of the other considerations? Think of two more. Ruben.
Whether you and the non-Jew know each other, in which case if the non-Jew knows you, there's the possibility that they'll do more labor than they would otherwise for on your behalf.
Great. And one more consideration. Ori?
I don't know if this counts, but the one about if the city is a Jewish city or a non-Jewish city in general. I had a specific ramification in that halacha, but
right. I think that might fold back into the question of are they doing it for Jews or non-Jews, right? And if they do it for sort of an anonymous mass, but most of the mass are Jews, then we're going to consider it as I'm doing it for Jews. But one last thing sort of related to the work itself, the nature of the work. Lexi?
Is it something that changes in quantity depending on how many people it is for?
Great. And obviously that itself at some point will become a blurry boundary, right? A bonfire does not change from 1 to 50 people, but it might change from 50 to, 200. Great. What are some of the rationales the Rambam gives for why these things may or may not be, or in the context in which some of these things might be okay to receive hana'ah? We covered some of them, I think, when Alan was talking, but just to reiterate them. In the case in which we can derive benefit from work non-Jews have done, what would the rationale be?
Well, if we fall if we fall outside the slippery slope argument, I would guess like things are permitted, right?
Great. Certain things are permitted, and just to drill down, the context in which they're permitted, depends on the criteria we described. But when it's permitted, it's because we can say we're not responsible for their shvita. Right? Their shvitato is not aleinu. Shvitatam is not aleinu. And we have to be able to argue that they're doing it adata denafshe, right? They're doing it on their own initiative for themselves. In which case things might be okay. Last part of this exercise. Can people tell me from parts of the Shulchan Aruch we read, and then I can throw in some others we didn't read, where some of the simanim might fall into this schematic of amirah / schirut versus hana'ah below amirah? Which simanim or seifim within simanim might fall one way or another? And the reason I'm asking this is just, again, like Alan and I had enough trouble doing the mapping, and I think it's worth just knowing where the things are so that as we continue to move through this topic, it's clear like where the different pieces are coming from as the Nosei Kelim and Achronim are trying to understand like what are all the live issues here. Or Joel.
So Hana, some of Hana is in Reish Ayin Vav, right? It's a big part because he's in the Ner section of the Shulchan of the Torah organization, so they use that piece about Ner to go off on that. So.
Great. Other pieces that show up in different places. And Alan and I have mentioned some of them already, so you can. Ruben. Or yeah, Ruben and then Sarah.
Shin Dalet Seif Bet seems to be amirah.
I'm not.
No?
Sorry, I'm actually not looking at it.
No,
But
no, it mentions it. That's great. It mentions it Derech Agav.
Great.
Refu Tzurich. Kola.
Wait, Shin or Daled Shin Bet is Hecha Demutar Eved Lasot Malacha Latzmo. Ima Mar Leha Don She'aseh Latzmo. I think that's not really amirah because it's not. I'm not telling him to do something for me. I'm actually like letting him do something for him. I might receive, and I would say this is one of the like indeterminate ones, but I would say not amirah in the traditional sense.
Oh yeah, I was thinking about Aleph. Tzurich Kola Shin Postakana.
Other pieces that we looked at. Sarah.
Yeah, so Shin Zion, I'm thinking of that in particular, but yeah, is about amirah.
Great. Bet through Hey and Shin Zion, and then also I think Kaf and Kaf Aleph are like some of the core amirah texts. With Joel, was that a hand?
Yeah, why not? All the like the schirut, the part shutafut, all this stuff is like Reish Mem Gimel to Reish Mem Zayin, maybe, or maybe I think it's Reish Mem Chet. Is that about sailing? Yeah, also maybe Reish Mem Chet, right? So that's really all the stuff that you would set up before Shabbat potentially. You know, on Shabbat that could be a problem if you're dealing with a partnership or a a business relationship with a non-Jew, essentially. So.
Great. And then just the last. The two other big ones that are important, 325, which we didn't look at, is really Hana'ah. If non-Jews have done work, how do you relate to it? And then I think it's 252 Bet also relates to the question of amirah. Sorry, 252 Dalet is for another schirut section. Okay, so that on the broadest sense is Goy Shel Shabbos shows up in a number of other little places, but in terms of the main questions and issues, that is where it shows up. And again, as Rav said, the Shulchan Aruch has his own system. Goy Shel Shabbos shows up in the places in which it shows up in a relevant other topic. The Rambam condenses it all into one place. Each system might be better for doing certain sorts of things, or depending on how your brain works. So let's take maybe a 5-minute break and then we'll jump into amirah.
Yeah. Nice to see some new faces.
And some new blank screens. Okay, we'll give everyone another minute. Okay, great. Maybe it's just okay. So we're turning to 307 for amirah. I think it might just be worth asking if people want to skim. You can skim the Pratei Ramzei Dinim in the tour for like 20 seconds. And if you want to skim also the first halacha. And the question will be, what unifies this list? I do think I actually already said it, but you can also offer a different answer. You can offer that answer. Maybe you didn't hear what I said. Okay. What unifies the list here? Reb Joel.
This is a siman about things that are forbidden to say, not particularly to whom, but that you just cannot say in general. And then the topic and the subject of the speech are both come up in it.
Great. And in terms of the introduction to this siman, how does the Torah introduce it?
I mean, the same way he's been working since Shin Aleph, right? Right, is his organizing principle for really this Shin Aleph. Sorry, on. So
great. What is right? So and so here it's the daber davar. Why? Two questions. Why does that make sense as the introductory passage here, and why might it be a little strange vis-a-vis amirah lenochri?
Or maybe introducing the fact that the day of Shabbat has to be different from the rest of the week, and that extends to also your speech.
Great.
It doesn't have to be like an actual action that's associated with your speech, just your speech has to be different. The avirah of the day has to be different than the rest of the week.
Great. You're not right. We're speaking a certain way on Shabbat that we don't speak, or we are not speaking on Shabbat a certain way that we do speak during the rest of the week. Why?
And I think to a certain extent, just how it relates to your mindset, right? Your mindset on Shabbat has to be different. Talking kind of like induces a sort of mindset. So if you start talking about business, you're going to think about the rest of the week, and it might lead to kind of the same slippery slope argument that the Rambam makes, right?
Great. There's maybe it's a slippery slope. If you're talking about business, you're like basically doing business. Maybe it's an atmosphere. What arguably is a little strange in relation to that that drash for daber davar vis-a-vis amirah lenochri?
This just feels like a sort of artificial category to me. Like it's not as though how are we getting the existing category of amirah lenochri to fit into daber davar. It's like, actually, no, we have a category of things we shouldn't say on Shabbat, which is a very meaningful category in and of itself. And it makes perfect sense with this Torah, and it makes sense to say what's like the things which you wouldn't say to Jews, to non-Jews, under that, but that's not the organizing principle.
Sorry, say that. What's not the organizing principle?
It's not as though, they're shoehorning in amirah lenochri to this, category under daber davar. It's like, no, we're talking about forms of speech that are forbidden on Shabbat, and that context makes perfect sense to talk about. And also ways of speaking to non-Jews that might, specifically to non-Jews that might not be permitted. But I think it's perfectly reasonable to put that under this category.
So I'm not saying not reasonable to put it under the category, but in terms of the drash itself, if you look at the drash that the Torah gives, shelo yehi dibrocha shel Shabbat kedibrocha shel chol, right? So that the way you speak on Shabbos shouldn't be the way you speak on chol. But the issue with amirah lenochri seems to be actually not about the thing we're speaking. It's that you're getting someone to do something on Shabbos, right? It's usually about the isser itself and less about the fact that I'm talking.
I think I disagree with you. Like, that's why we have a separate category of being forbidden to get hana from the work of the nochrei in lots of situations. But what I would take from this is that yes, absolutely, there is something specifically about the speech which is forbidden. There are things that it's fine for a non-Jew to do for you if you don't, if it doesn't involve saying it on Shabbat, or even if you hint it in the right way. But it's not fine to literally say the words, like how there are other forms of speech that we don't do on Shabbat.
I'll take it, Lexi.
We don't allow it on you to actually do anything for us, right? That the whole point of like when we're allowed to benefit, Dafka, it's only in the scenarios where you can say that it wasn't being done for you. Like I do think there is an interesting question, but like the whole point with the hana'ah is that you are not supposed to be getting any hana'ah from them having done this on your behalf, right? And so we are allowed to benefit when we think actually our presence hasn't meaningfully impacted the violation, or not violation, but the action that was being performed, period. But I would incline towards the agreement that the main thing we are concerned about is this notion that like there's separate categories, I think, not necessarily because speech is a separate type of isser, but because there are different considerations of like if things are done for you versus like what are the considerations when you are actively getting someone to do things, right? Those are related but distinct categories of like what can I do provided something already happened? And what am I allowed to tell others to do?
Great. Again, not to come to a conclusive answer, but just to say that on the one hand, it's intuitive to put these things together insofar as they're speech acts. What's non-intuitive is that this sort of speech act, what's problematic about it is very different. One is the speech act itself, and the other seems to be in the speech act, you are causing someone to do something that they will do that they're not supposed to do. Which is not necessarily true in speaking about your bank account, in which the speech itself is the only problematic function, as opposed to a speech act that gets someone else to break Shabbos for you in a way that you cannot do for yourself. Or Blandys.
Rev Lenny's, you're muted right now.
The bear divad.
Yeah. They zoomed across.
Okay, fine. I'm sorry, I may have, it was a very fascinating conversation, but I just wanted to know, because it comes close to it, if we discuss the relationship between a dibur, which is from Jew to Jew, and a dibur that is from a Jew to a non-Jew. You know, a Jew can say to a Jew, you know, cook basar b'chalav, you know, that seems to be a parallel case. But it's sticking on, but just is there a difference between what a Jew says? What's that? What's about the relate? I have a kind of a definition I can give you, but what's that kind of relationship between a Jew to a Jew or a Jew to a non-Jew? Is there? How do you categorize that?
So we did not. We're not going to bring that in just because it seems. I think that is more related to 307 on its own. But I would say roughly. I do think like it falls along this this divide. The things you're going to say to a non-Jew are not break Shabbat for me. It would be things you shouldn't be talking about on Shabbos. If you look at the Bach's explanation of the drush, daber davar is really about talking about schora. It's not asking someone to do something. And so the things we'd be doing with a Jew that are not okay is back to maybe what Ruben said about sort of the amirah of Shabbos. The things we'd be asking non-Jews to do are things for us.
Okay, so I'll wait to 307. I'll take that. I will just make a remark that it's fascinating how the pasuk daber davar becomes a pasuk that's very weighty. You know, it's very weighty in halacha, even though its source is quote unquote a non-halachic source, but how it has become halachic in its own right, partially because it takes care of all those areas, the whole pasuk and how it's darshan and that, it takes care of all those areas that somehow have been missed, and therefore it's good to find a source, and then the source becomes more important than from where it came from, and more important than it came from Nach. Okay, I'll get to my other thing at a later point.
Jessica, just apropos of your point, I do think the difference there is also that the benefit is post Shabbos, and not on Shabbos there.
But the specific distinction they're making is about what you say. It's not, the whole point is there are some things that maybe it's okay to do this, but you certainly cannot explicitly say that that's what you're doing. And that's what Aron and Allen says, that you're allowed to hint, it's about where you define the line in speech acts. It's not, there's a whole separate inyan of hana'ah, but what we're actually talking about here is, the degree to which you can say something. You're allowed to say something if it's not a direct representation of the thing that would be forbidden.
Granted. I just want, Joel, is it on this point or?
I want to just back up Jessica, what she's saying, if that's okay, if I can, because I just think about it. I wonder if we're overly influenced by the Rambam, who does put the two of them together, puts Hana and amirah akum together, right? But the Gemara certainly doesn't, right? The Gemara, if you look, right, it's the fact that amirah akum is a problem Shabbat is an offhanded comment on Shabbos about trying to figure out if you can ask a non-Jew to muzzle your ox, right? It's in Bava Metzia, right, or something like that. It's it has nothing to do with Hana'ah there. It's like just an offhanded mark. We know it's a shvut on Shabbos, and the Torah, I don't know if it's obvious that he's thinking about this as a Hana'ah perspective, or he's thinking about it as just the speech itself is problematic. So
fair enough. I'll withdraw.
No, I think your argument's good. I just want to say that I think there's a lot to what Jessica's saying on this other side. So
great. So we'll keep this tension alive until whoever does 307, and you can answer it for us. What are some of the main shitot in the context of when can you do amirah? What context would it be okay? And here, not talking about remiza, specifically amirah lenochri on Shabbos. Max, you can give one shita or as many as you want, but
one of the Rambams is tzorach Rabbi. If there's, is that what you're looking for? Those.
Give me the whole shit. What is the what is the sort of isser, and what is the broader context?
So it seems like if there's I guess there's if it's an isser derabanan, then you, according to Rambam, can for tzorach rabim ask a non-Jew to do something. And it was the Baal HaItur who said that even for a deoraita, you can, or sorry, that was just for mitzvah. That was just for mitzvah, not for tzorach rabim. But there's
for a mitzvah, for tzorach gadol, for ktsat chola.
Yeah,
fully. Okay, right. So the Rambam is Isser D'Rabbanan for a purpose. And then there's one Isser D'Oraita, or one context in which he mentions you can get someone to do an Isser D'Oraita. Anyone remember what that is? Jacob?
It's when you are like caught with Shabbos approaching outside the Erev and you're holding your wallet.
Yes, sorry, there's one more Isser D'Oraita you're allowed to do. Potentially, for a particular mitzvah. Lexi?
Right, depending on which Mefarish you paskin, like potentially you can violate an Isser D'Oraita for Mila. According to a couple others, potentially you can violate, well, a couple, according to mainly the Bahag and the Baal HaItor, you can maybe violate an Isser D'Oraita for, get them to violate an Isser D'Oraita for mitzvah.
Sorry, just talking about for the Rambam specifically.
For the Rambam, he talks about Mila.
And one other thing. Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, you can have someone write a star. What is the Rambam's reasoning? Forget the part about Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. What is the Rambam's reasoning that you can do an Isser D'Rabbanan for some, as long as there's a Tzorech? He doesn't give the reasoning himself, but it's in the Beit Yosef from the Magid Mishnah. Max?
It's shvut to shvut.
Okay, and what is the paradigmatic? Just say what shvut to shvut is.
It's you can stack two rabbinic prohibitions, and get yourself to a heter.
Great. And how do we know, according to the Rambam or according to the Magid Mishnah, according to the Rambam, that we can do this? Shvut to shvut.
This was this the case of the baby?
Mm-hmm.
You've prepared hot water for a meal, right?
Yeah, you can ask a non-Jew to bring hot water in an area that has not had an eruv. We know you can do that, and so Mila for the Rambam, or at least for the Rambam according to the Magid Mishnah, Mila is paradigmatic. There's something you can do vis-a-vis Mila that you can do for everything. Great. Give me another, and who paskins like the Rambam? Let me rephrase. Who important paskins like the Rambam?
The Machaber.
Great. The Shulchan Aruch paskins like the Rambam. Great. Give me another psak. And you don't have to pull the, like, specifically from the sections we read of the Beit Yosef. Some of the main Shita. Ruben, is that a hand?
The Tosfot rule that only Mila itself can be Doche Shabbat is one of the Shitot.
Great. So for the Tosfot, and same with Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, these mitzvot are not paradigmatic. Why is Mila not paradigmatic, according to the Tosfot? What's special about it? Either Ruben or anyone else? Jacob?
I mean, it's arguably, it's established as Deoraita that it overrides Shabbat.
Great. So there's something, Mila in general has a relation to being Doche Shabbos. Rabbinic prohibitions, sorry, the bringing the hot water would not, you can't bring hot water yourself. So in that sense, there are parts of Mila that don't Doche Shabbat, right? Only the essential parts of Mila Doche Shabbos. But because Mila already has a relation being Doche Shabbos, like maybe Mila is not paradigmatic. And you could say the same about Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Okay. We have two other main shitot from the Beit Yosef. Someone mentioned the Etor. Alexi, do you want to spell out the Etor?
Sure. The Etor, who's building off of the Bahag, they're pretty much the only two people who say that, first of all, there's a debate about how to read the Gemara, the sugyas about Mila, which is whether the Nochre in the sugyot is being asked to violate a Durabanan or a Doraita. And so the Tosfot, for example, think that it's a Durabanan, right? They have like the most narrow of like, you can tell a non-Jew to violate a Durabanan only for Mila, right? Whereas the Etor is like the exact opposite, who is like, it's a Doraita, and not only is it a Doraita that the Nochre is violating there, that's meant to be a paradigm for other mitzvot, that you can ask a non-Jew to violate a Doraita, Isser for any mitzvah, including like having a candle for your Shabbos table.
Great. And then one last Shita we have. The Raviyah. Does anyone remember what he says? Maybe let's actually just read inside. Does someone want to read? Someone volunteer to read in the Beit Yosef? And I'll tell you where to read.
This is the Takanali de Yehudi, right? That one. That's yeah.
Okay. You want to spell that out, Rev Joel?
It's like if we could have set something up to allow us to do it, then it's mutar to ask a non-Jew, but otherwise we can't. So like I could have put an eruv up, and before Shabbos, therefore I'm allowed to ask non-Jew to carry this for me. But that's the only exception.
Right, and that's specifically for mitzvot. What sort of mitzvah?
It's deoraita, he says even, right?
Right. So the Ravya says Durabanan, when we're talking about mitzvah Durabanan, like the Rambam, it's fairly easy to override. And then for Duraita too, so long as it's something that a Jew could have found a way of doing, you can ask them to do it. And the Beit Yosef has this whole has a complaint about it, but we will not get we won't get into it. How does the Torah rule? Ruben?
Well, I was going to say it wasn't clear to me because he mentions the Shita of the Rambam and the Shita of the Tosfot in it, and he doesn't seem to say either way.
Okay. If you look in the Beit Yosef, well, actually, sorry. Does anyone else have another option? Of how the Torah rules? Okay, let's jump over to the Beit Yosef. Does someone want to read, and I'll tell you where to read? Any brave halachists? All right, great. Okay, so do you see in the Torah where it says Doche Shabbos right before Vav?
Yeah.
Everyone see that? Give me a thumbs up. Next to that, in the Beit Yosef, it says V'zehu da'at Rabbeinu. Everyone sees that?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, and this is following his description of the Tosfot's Shita. Ori, over to you.
All right. V'zehu da'at Rabbeinu shekatav b'siman shinamechet. She'avei ha'ezri. I don't know if I'm reading that right. Hitir lomar legoy lenagen b'klei shir b'chupot. The amirah legoy b'makom mitzvah shari. V'ani katavti.
Maybe pause there.
Mhm.
Maybe just pause there and translate.
Oh, okay. So according to the tour, he would. I'm not sure which. I don't know what Shavei Ezri is.
Avi Ha'ezri is the Rabia.
Oh, the Avi Ezri, Rabia. He permitted a non-Jew to play instruments at a chuppah because speaking to a non-Jew for a mitzvah is allowed.
Okay, and then the tour continues. This is the quote from the tour. Continue.
ואני כתבתי למעלה שאין להתיר אמירה לגוי, אלא בדבר שהוא עצמו דוחה שבת, כגון מילה. Okay, so he's sort of bringing it through. This is only in a case where you can ask a goy to do something for you on Shabbat in a kind of mitzvah that's already doche Shabbat.
Great. So he holds. How does the tour hold for Ori or anyone?
I suppose that ends him up like Tosafot.
Great. Torah seems to hold like the Tosafot.
So why does he bring the Rambam?
Why does he bring the Rambam? He just says that's what the Rambam says.
But he's sort of taking it down, and I thought maybe he was modifying it with the Tosafot. But it's just a more strict shita like the Tosafot.
Yeah, he seems to just bring both positions, and it's not actually clear you're right from 307. Rav Joel?
Yeah, I just the tour isn't always like a bottom line halacha guide, right? That's not the way he operates a lot of the time, and so he often will give just multiple people's opinions without making it obvious, or maybe he thinks you're going to read further and get what he gets out of it. But he, as I said, I don't think it's like a law book in that same way that we think of modern day American law books or something like that. So.
Great. In 307, the tour, it's not so clear what he would say, and then in Shin Lamed Chet, he seems to offer a clear ruling.
In that case, it's most important that the Beit Yosef is reading the Torah this way, right? And that, to create a clear shita.
Great. And let's just give me, there are two positions the Torah mentions on Remiza, on hinting to a Jew after Shabbos. Ruben?
Is it the Baal HaYitzor? And I don't know if I'm misremembering who he brings as saying that you can say something like, once Shabbos is over, you could tell someone, oh, why didn't you do this thing for me last Shabbos? Even though they'll understand that you want them to do that thing for you the following Shabbos. Is that the Baal HaYitzor?
It's the Smug and the Baal Truma.
Oh, Baal Truma. Okay.
And what does the Torah say? It says probably shouldn't do it. Okay, those are the two two main shita. You can do Remiz.
Qualification that you can't say, why didn't you do this for me? You can say, oh, I noticed that you like didn't light the fire this Shabbos to warm yourself up. Like, so interesting. But I think you're not allowed to say, why didn't you light the fire for me on Shabbat?
Great. Right. And the Torah says Mistaber Katzat Leisor. In general, those are the two positions on Remiza, as you might imagine. One, Remiza is okay under certain circumstances, and the other is that Remiza is not okay. That, I think, takes us to the end of 307. Joel said there's another possibility that the Torah writing in Christian Spain is living in a world where there's adherence to the Rambam, and his aval is a way of saying he does not agree with the practice in his world. Interesting. Right. And as Rav Lexi pointed out, both even the Sefer HaMitzvot and the Baal Truma who are allowing Remiza are assuming that Remiza is something you're doing after Shabbos. But I'm sure a number of us have either been in a situation or seen a situation or heard about a situation where someone says, wow, I wish that the light was on, which is Remiza on Shabbos, which at a certain point becomes much more normative.
Isn't that in the Bach, if I'm remembering right? Hoping someone else has seen this photo and can confirm or deny.
Not sure. I don't remember the Bach. Reb Landis.
Still learning how to use this. Just on your last point. So what Aron says in terms of Remiza, that you have to separate in the remez, separate the Pa'ula from the Poel, which basically is what you were saying, is you don't say, or what Lexi was saying, is that you don't include yourself into the action, but you say, the light on, there's no light on here. Or something better than that. I can't think of a better one right now.
We'll turn the light on.
There's the Aruch
as
HaShulchan
opposed to turn the light on, that's for sure. But as opposed to like I could use the light here. Right. As opposed, right. So you separate the Poel from the well, not the Poel in this case, the Nifal, the person who benefits, the one who was acted upon, which be you, or the Nehana. Let's say that. I'll say it better. I don't remember what the language was. It was something like that. That the Nehana, you separate the Nehana, one who's getting the benefit or wants the benefit. You kind of eliminate that. You just talk about the Pula, and that becomes a remez.
Great. And also, Jessica, you're right. The Bach does mention, sort of takes it as the Sefer HaMitzvot is talking about Remiza in general. The Aruch HaShulchan has a thing about, how he would have they would have a Shabbos goy who they would say, we have a lot of alcohol for you in the Beit Knesset. Unfortunately, it's very dark in there. And they would sort of go through that shtick every now and then. But With all of that, I think we'll move on to Alan. 244.
Amazing. I want to just pick up on that point and highlight this general blurriness of between Remiza and Amirah. There's an Orech Chayyim which they did not remember to bring, but of with a very charming anecdote where he's recounting his childhood. And he remembers that he and his friends would be sitting by the fire pit on Shabbat, drinking cold wine, and the non-Jews would be walking by, and these young men would say, "Wouldn't it be great if we could have some hot wine? It just tastes better hot." For me, this whole system of hinting, it points to a world where Jews and non-Jews are actually in intimate social contact with each other and are reading into each other's speech and actions, a whole series of desires and needs. Yeah, so just as we're exploring all of this, it's interesting to just think about, well, what are the social situations in which some of this stuff could come up. You could imagine a novel, the Shabbos Boy, you have to do it. Okay, so we're going to turn to 244, but without covering all of it, just pick up on some of the major themes that have not yet been noticed. So I want to start just by revisiting briefly what are some of the underlying criteria for what would make a kablanut permitted or prohibited over Shabbos.
Sure, Rav Allen, would you mind repeating the question? I didn't hear it.
Yes. What are the criteria that would make kablanut prohibited or permitted over Shabbos?
If it's a contract for like years, if it's like, I have asked you to do this discrete piece of work and there's no particular time restrictions on when you do it, that would be permitted. Whereas if it's like you have to do this by Sunday morning, as we saw before, that would be forbidden.
Great. Yes, that was what Sarah, I believe, mentioned earlier. That was Pay. Others?
Where you are and how, and thus how the action will be perceived as you're just actually hiring the person in a way that would be us, or would it be perceived as, oh, this is contract work?
Great. Yes, that is Aleph. One other small one that we did, I believe that we did not mention, specifically in terms of building, you need to make sure that it's not mechubar. It's like a foundational beam to a property. A little bit more technical there. I want to briefly look at the tour, which brings a machloket that's is the foundation for the first Eve. So folks, we go to the tour on Reish Mendalet with the Aleph bet next to it. I don't believe I assigned this, but I was looking over it.
Ouais, mom. Ok, tu vas où? Sorry, guys.
Okay, any brave volunteers to just read the first couple of lines of the Torah? All right, go ahead.
Okay, אבל הייתה מלאכה בגלוי, כגון
Okay, first,
I'm in the wrong place.
Yisrael shesachar goyim livnot lo bayit. First piece of the Torah and Reish Dalet.
Oh, sorry. ישראל ששכר גויים לבנות לו בית בקבלנות, היה מתיר רבנו תם, שיבנה לו בשבת. Okay, so a Jew who contracts a non-Jew to build him a house, Rabbeinu Tam would allow it, that he could build for him on Shabbat. Rabbeinu Yitzchak asru, ואפילו סיטת הגוי האבנים בביתו בשבת. Rabbi Yitzchak would be machmir even to for a non-Jew to sort of I don't know if it's to pile the rocks in his house on Shabbat. Asur Yisrael l'shok'an b'vinyan. A Jew could not. I don't know what that means in this context. Sleep in or settle in.
Yeah, I think
settle in the rocks.
To like set the foundations of the rocks, I believe.
I don't think it's about foundation here. I think the idea is that the non-Jew is gonna hew the stones in his house, right? So no one sees it, right? And then you're gonna use those stones to build your house, right? To make them part of the building. I don't think it matters what part. I think it's just those you can't the Reese says you can't do that.
Oh, so it's in the context of the Sitat Habanim, because that's going to be you, Shokah, like you're going to settle them as parts of the house.
Yeah, you're going to make them part of the karka at that point, right? You're gonna put them.
Even if you're just placing them, it ends up being that. Yeah. V'hani mili shehu b'toch hatchum. This is talking about within tchum, about inu chutz latchum. וגם אין עיר אחרת בתוך תחומו של בית שבונה מותר. So if everything was within tchum, and there's no other city within this tchum, that would be of building the house, that would be allowed. So basically, assuming the only problem would be sort of moving all this stuff and outside of a tchum Shabbat.
Great. So the question I wanted to drill in on was what would be the rationale of Rabbeinu Tam for actually matiring building through coupling of Shabbat?
We can approach it many ways within the parameters we've already set. For example, it could be that it's technically not your hana'ah because he's got a long-term contract. He can decide when to do it. So it can be hana'at atzmo that he's, going to fulfill the contract on Shabbat, and that's part of his own workload that he's taken on through the Kabbalah.
Great. So that all seems reasonable, but it's not the end of the story, because if we look to the Beit Yosef, there is a surprise turn of events. I'm looking at 4 lines from the end of Aleph and the Beit Yosef. Sorry, 5 lines. The Katru Sham Hatostat.
This is Aleph you're talking about here.
Aleph,
just to
Aleph,
clarify to people. Yeah.
Books right there. Anyone want to take a crack at it? Okay, I did not ask folks to prep this, but was
going.
just fascinated by it myself. Yeah, all right, sure, keep going.
אוקיי, וכתבו שם התוספות והראש והמרדכי, שרבינו תם לא סמך על הוראתו כשבנה ביתו. So the Tosfot and the Rosh and the Mordechai all brought that Rabbeinu Tam wouldn't have or didn't actually rely on his own teaching when he built his house. ונראה לי שמשום הכי לא כתב רבינו Rabbeinu Tam matir, and that's why the Tur didn't just say Rabbeinu Tam allows it. I guess because he says Hayam matir. So that language being somehow distanced slightly. V'hari oser ela katav Hayam matir Rabbeinu Tam. Oh, I see. So he could have written Rabbeinu Tam matir v'ri oser. Instead, he wrote Hayamatir Rabbeinu Tam. Klomar mitchila Hayamatir Rabbeinu Tam. So originally Rabbeinu Tam was lenient. Aval achar kach sheba ma'aseh liyado lo hitir. Meaning, you know, he until the actual case came up, and then he was not matir.
Beautifully read.
It's the drama.
Yeah, it's a nice dictum, right? But you know, reading this, it's an interesting question. What might it have been that caused Rabbeinu Tam to reconsider here? Right, like, so anyone want to tell a story? Like, what revelation might he have had halakhically that made him say, "Oh, you know what? I was wrong, and my group is wrong." Ruben?
Well, if I could take a gander, I would say like it's not necessarily they changed his mind. They just like took in consideration his own position as a halachic authority. And once again, like if he allows it, like that might be like a slippery slope, and people might believe that it's permitted to tell people on Shabbat to build their houses, right? So it's kind of a geder in a way.
Yeah, it's a public policy prescription.
Right.
Wait, and so what would be so bad if he allowed non-Jews to build his house on Shabbos? Like, what's the worst that could happen?
Well, people might start saying like, "Oh, he gave instruction to build his house on Shabbat." No, it's not like they'll have in mind that like he hired them for a whole year just to ask them to build the house. People might start believing that it's permitted to ask them straightforwardly to build the house on Shabbat.
All right, Joel.
I just wondering if we can look at the whole piece in the Beis Yosef Orech, we could summarize it because it's actually, I think, maybe gives some insight to what's going on here a little bit, right? It's I could summarize it if you want, but it's just
yeah, go for it,
right.
Joel.
Rabbeinu Tam's argument is that like we allow arisut on Shabbat, right? Someone who's like sharecropper is the wrong word, but that's somebody who like tends your field, but they get a percentage of the produce for it, like 25% or something like that, and that's allowed. And they're mashpiach your field. So he's like, well, if it's kablanut alachat kama v'chama, right? I didn't tell him when to go do this. The Aris is for sure going to work on Shabbos. This guy, not necessarily. I gave him a contract. They decide when they want to do it. So this is from Arisut, we can learn it. And he gets pushback from people like, I think it's the other Tosfot and the Rosh that unlike Arisut, right? You don't have somebody, people can see someone working your field, they're going to assume it's arisut. If someone sees someone building your house, they may assume it's kablanut, they may assume it's a day-to-day thing. And because the assumptions are not obvious, therefore, that's the pushback against Rabbeinu Tam. And Rabbeinu Tam might have agreed with that eventually, might have said, okay, you know what, I agree with you that you're making a good argument. I can't learn this from arisut. So, but also see the Darchei Moshe, who thinks that that whole argument that Rabbeinu Tam recanted is wrong. So.
Nice. I'll take one more hand from Uri, and then we'll keep going.
Is this connected, the story that you kind of told or wanted us to tell, is that connected to tchum issue in the end, that sort of, if it's coming chutz tchum. And Joel, you're muted.
Oh, like, I mean, the chutz tchum is who will see it, right? This is about, is it within the confines of where people will see it? And yeah, I imagine that's also connected there. But
well, yeah, that's why I wanted to connect it like story-wise, because for the tour's whole process here, that this ending piece with the tchum is sort of showing the rationale being connected with that same thing we mentioned, which is the public, private, how it will be interpreted, problem with
yeah, if I'm building a house in the middle of somewhere that the only hiking trails can access, it sounds like it's no one's gonna make any judgments about how it was getting built at that point. So,
and what if they're doing work in your backyard? No one can see. Like there's contractors who literally are just in a Reshut Yachid. I'm just extrapolating here now to a different case, but
you really want my personal thoughts on that? I mean,
I'm just on the thinking of the tour here.
This is everyone knows when someone's building in someone's backyard. You see there's a porta potty and a dumpster and there's trucks and there's I mean, it's pretty hard to keep that kind of stuff silent, I think. So, but
so I want to turn towards this question of who is seeing and what is being seen, and this comes up in a fascinating way in the Magen Avraham. So if we head back to the Shulchan Aruch on Reish Dad, Seif Aleph, I'm trying. Should we read through all of it? I'll just. I'll pick up a little bit in the middle here, right? So we get the psak that the kablanut in general is fine. V'met v'rim amurim b'tzina she'em makirim hakol shezo malacha naseh b'shvat shel Yisrael. Aval im hayta yedua meforsemet aser, right? If the work is happening before Hesia, and everyone knows that the Jew is contracting the non-Jew to do it. That's crossing the line. Right. It is not clear that this was a Kaplanut style arrangement. The people watching are just going to think this non-Jew is doing the work for the Jew on specifically on Shabbat. לפיכך הפוסק אם אינו יהודי לבנות לו חצרה או כותלו או לקצור לו שדהו, אם הייתה המלאכה במדינה או בתוך התחום, אסור לו להניח לעשות לו מלאכה בשבת, מפני הרועים שאינם יודעים שפסק. Right. If a Jew contracts with a non-Jew to build a chatzar or a wall, and this is in like a very visible place, it is Aser. Oh. Sorry, a little bit too far. And
Alan, are you looking for Sif Katan Bet?
no, I'm still just a couple 1 or 2 more lines. V'vilim dar bin einam yodim yesh l'chus l'orchim aba'im sham o lifnei veito sheyafashtu oto. Right. Even if you're living among non-Jews, you suspect for the visitors might be coming along. V'im hayta hamlacha chutz litzpam v'gam ein ira acheret b'toch tzpuma shel makam she'osim b'mlacha. Okay, but if you're really in a place that is that there are not other Jews around, then we don't actually have to worry about it. And that is where the Magen Avraham picks up. So could someone read Sif Katan Chet? Max might not be who's behind there.
Yeah, I'm here. Okay. Chutz tchum, right?
Yep.
Okay. V'leika lamecha sheyiklu'u orchim l'sham demistama in derech Yisrael lishbot ela etzel Yehudim. And there's no concern that that guests are gonna come by, are gonna happen by, because as a default, Jews live among Jews. Okay, po be'irenu nohagin heter liskor akum bekavlanut likach hazevel min harechov ve'akum osim hamalacha b'Shabbat ve'afagav demalacha deoraita kidam rinan haytalo gav shoshit v'natla chayav mishu boneh dematakin harechov. So here in our city, we're lenient to hire out non-Jews to take the zevel, the fertilizer from the street, and non-Jews the one doing the work on Shabbat, even though it's an Isser D'Oraita, because it's metakin the street. V'tzarich lomar degadol echad horeh lahem kach mishum debishel rabim leike chashta k'moshe katav b'Yoredei Siman kuf mem aleph siv dalet. Right, so it seems like an important posek ruled this way because when it's a communal need, everyone knows what's going on, and there's no suspicion because it's for everyone. Aval b'sachir yom shita daser, but that's only the case if you're hired out long term, not day to day. Keep going.
Just pause for a second. What do folks think of this this particular claim that for a sort of public need, we don't need to worry so much about married ayin? Like, how does this fit in with our previous discussions? Sarah?
Well, it really depends what the reality are about people's relationship to non-Jews, right? Because if it seems like, well, only the Jews could have hired these non-Jews to come pick up the garbage for the Jews, that starts to look a lot more like the other kinds of married ayin that we might be worried about. As opposed to saying, you know, my neighborhood in Minneapolis, where most of the people are Jews, but not all the people are Jews, we might say, okay, and certainly the entity doing the hiring and firing of the garbage collector is not Jewish per se. Then you might say, okay, well that feels different, so that then, you know, they come pick up my garbage. They don't pick up my garbage on Shabbos, but like they were to, that would feel different. Right? Depends on the composition of the neighborhood in the same way that, like, you know, turning on the lighting a lamp for Rov Yehudim or not matters.
Yeah, so just to say the obvious here, like what would be the reason to practical reason for this heter?
They don't have garbage on Shabbos.
They don't have sewers.
Yeah. Yes. If you have trash sitting out in the streets, that is a problem. Jacob, if I say your hand there for a second. No.
Me.
Or you go ahead.
Is this similar to the bathhouse? That's sort of a public institution that they're going to be heating it up anyways. That we saw.
Right, as long as there's a rabbi, there's some case of plausible deniability here, right? That this is not being done only or specifically for Jews in quite the same way. Yeah, Aron.
I don't think it's because if there is not if in the case where there's not a rov of Yehudim and this is mostly happening for non-Jews, there'd be no problem to begin with. So I think this is in tension with the it's both slightly different because this is something we're doing. In some ways it would be more chumor. We're doing schirut for someone to do an action rather than potentially benefiting ex post facto from an action that's been done. But I do think this is in the context of seems like a Jewish area.
Or at least a Jewish couple of houses, right? Like I think it can't be. I mean, their streets are small if you look at the maps of these like early modern towns, right? So when they're talking about a street, they're talking about like a kind of alleyway between a couple of households. So then it's like it is really identifiable as Jewish, but it is also public space. So like the kind of complexity, the marker between what's mine and what's public, and therefore shared between Jews and non-Jews, is a little tricky.
Well, and the B'Shel Rabim Leka Chashta, I think, is a term that's reminiscent of that. This is about chashad, so I guess it's different in that sense. That was about Hana'a, but the principle of it being B'Shel Rabim at least is familiar because of the public-private that we're latching onto.
Yeah, I think it's a different Rabim category question. In this case, and this is like a heter that's way beyond what was allowed or forbidden vis-a-vis heating up water, because there's also it's a direct.
Right, and part of what's interesting here is that it points towards just a general tendency in the evolution of the Shabbos boy, and this is something that Katz discusses in his book, but just for the general functioning of society, there comes a point where it is maybe not necessary, but very, very fundamental that there are functions that non-Jews are serving as part of a broader community, and it's hard to think of a better example of that than trash collection. But the Magen Avraham gets even more interesting. So, Max, if you could take us to the end, just pick up where you left off.
Yeah. ואם כן, היה נראה להתיר לבנות בית כנסת בשבת בקבלנות. מכל מקום ראיתי שהגדולים לא רצו להתירו, כי בזמן הזה אין העכו"ם מניחין לשום אדם לעשות מלאכת פרהסיה ביום חגם, ואם נניח אנחנו לעשות, יכחיל השם. Okay, so it seems like you could use this logic to permit a non-Jew building a Beit Knesset on Shabbos, but I've seen that the Gedolim didn't want to do this because the non-Jews this is where we're at. The non-Jews didn't want to let us don't want to let us do work on public work on their holidays. And if we were to let them do work on our Shabbos, there'd be Chilul Hashem to it. Aval tikun harachov ein nikra al shem hayisrael kol kach, mikol makom b'makom she'ein noagin heter berachov ein lahakel. But just isn't like such an identifiable Jewish action, but still in a place where they don't have this heter with regards to cleaning the street, you shouldn't be makil.
I'll just say, actually, I withdraw Ori what I said to you. I think it seems like it is more intimately related than I had said.
Yeah, so what's fascinating is that we are getting a kind of extension of, or transformation of Mari Ayin that now involves how the non-Jews are watching the Jews' Shabbos practice, right? I'm curious what people think of this line of reasoning. Are you compelled by this heter, or do you feel that visceral sense of the Chilul Hashem?
I'm not clear on what the Chilul Hashem is, just from the first read.
Okay, so the Mechatzita Shekel spells it out a little bit more, but the sense is that there are some really frum non-Jews, Christians, who celebrate their Chag on Sunday. And those Christians actually prevent they prevent Jews from doing work on their Shabbos. And so if they see the Jews doing asking non-Jews to do all of that work, they're going to think that we don't actually take Shabbos seriously as they do. Okay, we have 2 minutes, so I'm just gonna like close out with some brief reflections of my own. I mean, there is this like strange interdependence going on here, right? Like I think the Magen Avraham really spells out in 2 ways. One is like an economic and a social interdependence between Jews and non-Jews that are living in the same city, right? Like in the end of the day, like someone is going to need to pick up the garbage, and so this institution of the Shabbos Goy becomes somewhat indispensable because, just as we saw in the pasuk that we started off the class with, right? There will be non-Jews that are living among us, and there are going to be, they will have lives of their own that are going to be intertwined with them. But there is also a sort of moral or religious interdependence that the Magen Avraham's pointing out here, that Jews suddenly, gradually are now looking to non-Jews for their definitions of what is Shabbos and how, and who is judging us for observing Shabbos. And so this comes up in the Chatam Sofer that they showed, which we will not have time to read, but it's on the sources if you'd like. This sense that other people are actually evaluating how our Shabbos is performed, in some ways, shapes the way that we are perceiving ourselves. So just one, as we go into the detail of the halachot of Goy Shel Shabbat, I want to leave open this idea that we are actually deeply intertwined, even as we are defining ourselves in opposition to the people who are outside of the Shabbat practice. Aaron, you want to add any last thoughts? I know we're just about out of time.
I think we can leave it there.
Okay. Thank you all so much for getting to live together. And I look forward to our next class. Rev Landis, Rev Joel, anything you want to send us off with?
I just want to say that there's a chakira waiting here and different types of hana. There's hana that's a benefit to a person, and it's hana. And then there's hana that is actually the removal of something bad within our midst. There's something irksome, not bad, something irksome within our midst. It doesn't seem to be really the same kind of thing as hana to an individual. That's adding something. In that case, hana to the individual is adding something form that he didn't have before. But the not trying to say it better, but the preventing having turd outside outside for the rabbin seems to be removed from the normal notion of hana. That's one comment. The second comment I'd say is we may be deeply intertwined, but it still comes out for the guy to take the shit out of the street and the Jews there. So I don't know if this intertwined thing is as close as your interfaith endeavor. I wouldn't give it as the first example in a meeting meditation before, but I think it's a different kind of hana.
I mean, I think it also there's an everybody who wants to go should go. But I think it gets back to some of the tensions you see in Tanaitic sources about the sort of eschatological future. Thinking of the Sefer on Devarim 15:11, where right if you there's an eschatological future in which the whole world has Shabbos, and there's an eschatological future in which we have Shabbos and non-Jews do the work for us all day, every day. And perhaps unconsciously, I think that tension plays out in terms of how we think about Shabbos Goy. Of is the future we're working towards one in which we all have Shabbos, a future we're working towards in which we don't actually really care what they do, and like they're not really part of this prefigurative thing we're enacting. I don't know the answer to it, and Jacob Katz probably has more to say than any of us, but I do think that's a tension underlying some of these questions.
Sorry, anybody can go, I want to say one more thing about what I tried to say earlier about the relationship in the act of the Jew to a non-Jew, a Jew to a Jew, is, and maybe it was said, is whether or not the person doing an act, the person you asked to do an act or you hinted to do the act, whatever, is a shliach or is a yad. Did that come up, the shliach and yad? If he's if the person is shliach, then even though we say shliach adam kamota, but a shliach makes independent decisions. A yad is just your hand. It's just a mechanism. It's like, so therefore, in the case that it's a yad, it's hard for and if you say the non-Jew is a yad, because that particular, peasant doesn't know anything from our laws. We're not interested in the peasant becoming a Talmid Chacham. You tell him what to do, he does it, or he knows he'll be fired. In fact, he may do better with you if he understands your hints. But with the Jew, we always consider the Jew to be a shliach. When a Jew is a shliach, then the Jew makes certain independent decision making. Anyway, that's something to meditate between yad and shliach.
Good on these.
Yes, koyach, guys.
Thank you.
Shana tova to everyone.
Shana Tova.
Oh yeah.